Hello.
Hello again. Here we are back. I would ask those of you with a cup of coffee standing up at the back of the auditorium to come back and get seated. For those of you who are online, welcome back to look at the agricultural and food system towards carbon neutrality panel session. Now we are a few minutes late. We'll have Carine BARBIER coming to the rostrum. Please keep to the 10-minute times which were allotted to you. We'll try and have more questions. So Carine BARBIER, you are an environmental economist at the French research organization CNRS. You work at CRED and you will review the issues and factors to have a carbon neutral agricultural, farming and food chain. Over to you. Hello everyone. Let us start here. Thank you and hello. So, by way of introduction, I would like to remind everyone that I have coordinated the research group on the food system and its carbon footprint. So I will be talking about the food system. This is not just farming production, farming operations, but a food system which involves all processes and systems engaged to give the French population the food they eat. So it is a system from the farm to the fork, from the field to the plate, whatever you call it. Point number one. Point number two, this food system has been shaped up, has been impacted by some policy making, which are not only specific to farming and to food. And so with the policies impacting and influencing and shaping up the food system, with the food system meeting a number of concerns and requirements, environmental requirements, climate-related constraints, biodiversity, water, and other concerns, food safety, food sovereignty, and so on and so forth, as well as economic and financial concerns, jobs, employment. So the carbon and energy footprint for the food system. On the left-hand side, you have the energy consumption categories engaged for all of the food system, from the fork to from the field to the fork. The first cost item is transportation, with a view of the energy footprint, i.e. taking into consideration imports of foodstuff for providing food to the French population. And transportation involves international and domestic transport, as well as household commuting to the shops to buy food. And the other cost items are for the farming sectors. On the right-hand side, you have the greenhouse gas footprint. On the right-hand side, the inner light green circle shows the CO2 emitted by the fossil fuels in the farming sector, as well as the other sectors, related sectors, transportation, distribution. And then you have methane emissions and nitrous oxide emissions connected with farming, which means that the farming phase of our food system accounts for 2/3 of the GHG emissions, the other third being the downstream part, transportation, distribution. Now, I don't have much time. Now, with respect to the pathways to achieve carbon neutrality, I just want to point out here 3 key points. The food consumption patterns, how these food consumption patterns have to change for nutritional and for environmental reasons. Farming practices is the second factor, and the third factor is with respect to imports of foodstuff and in the implications with respect to induced transportation and impacts going forward. Now, the analysis work we have conducted is part of a 2032 timeline with the interconnecting with the scenarios of the French ADEME agency and the national plan for France. So the first concern with respect to health is critical. It is critical to look for synergy between healthcare, and the food system. And the first factor to be noted is that today we are confronted with societal issues of overweight, obesity, which have grown in importance, as well as overconsumption of the daily food inputs. Knowing that the numbers I'm giving you are average numbers, we have overconsumption of calories, we have overconsumption of proteins as well. We consume twice as much protein compared with the recommended diet, so with a very high margin to reduce the protein input and to reduce the meat-based portion of our food consumption. On the right-hand side, you have the food consumption for solid food, not including beverages, 1/3 coming from animal products, meat in color red and dairy product in color pink. The remaining 2/3 are plant-based foodstuff, and with respect to meat, we consume some 110 grams of meat per person and per day, which with dairy product and milk accounting for more than 200 grams per person and per day. What is the impact of the food system on greenhouse gas emissions? Now, you have here results depending on the types of diets. These are diets including that you find in the French society, which is the result from a research on nutrition. And depending on the portion of meat in the diet, if you consume more than 170 grams per day and per person, or if you consume less, 75 grams or even less for vegetarians. Now, the carbon impact of the food diet varies and can be divided by a factor of 3 and even by a factor of 4. I told you about the current consumption levels. We consume some 110 grams of meat, with this number being an average ranging from 70 grams to 320 grams per person being the two extremes, the average number being 110 grams of meat per day per person. Now, this has two implications. If you want to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, you need to reduce the portion of meat, knowing that you have enteric fermentation producing methane and ruminants producing methanes, and you have animal feed as well, which has to be produced in order to feed the animal, including cereals and grains, including oil seeds and cereals which are imported, soya cakes, and so on and so forth. By reducing the meat portion of the food chain, you reduce the carbon footprint, and by doing that, you reduce the consumption level of animal feed. Last factor on consumption is food waste. This was the subject of a study conducted by the French ADEME agency, the baseline being 10 million tons of food wasted every year in France, only 20% of which being processed for animal feed, and 80% being discarded, totally wasted and discarded. So food waste has been accounted for in the scenarios which we have jointly developed with the ADEME French agency, with a goal to reduce the food waste by half, which would have an impact on the consumption of farming products. What the takeaway messages are is that we need to question the notions of our food demand in this respect, i.e. nutritional inputs, i.e. healthcare, nutritional contents, and environmental aspects. How can these diets and food consumption patterns can and should be changed in order to generate less carbon? The question is, can we produce less? Can we produce better with more added value? This is the question number one, question on demand and on sobriety, which is much needed now. With respect to the other factors, i.e. emissions produced by the farming sector. You have here emissions emitted by the farming industry, that is direct emissions from farms and farming operations. So in color yellow, you have methane, mainly coming from enteric fermentation from ruminants. I just mentioned this a minute ago. Then you have nitrous oxide emissions coming from nitrogen-based fertilizers and inputs, which basically generates an excess of nitrogen and N2O. Now, with respect to indirect emissions, you have the part upstream from farming, that is energy and power, emitting CO2, producing nitrogen-based fertilizers, plant health products, mainly derived from fossil fuels. This is upstream from the farming operations. Now, what are the consequences over the long-term GHG reduction pathways as part of the ADEME scenarios and the French national plans on the farming sector? Depending on the change in diets, you have the various scenarios. The first two scenarios halve the meat portion of the food system. So the green bars, i.e. methane reduced being significantly, and you have a change in farming practices with an increase of what you call nitrogen fixation symbiotically with legumes fixing nitrogen in the ground, substituting the input of nitrogen-based pesticides and fertilizers. You can reduce the emissions from the farming industry by a factor of 2 by 2050 with these first two scenarios. The last point on imports of foodstuff and transport of foodstuff. What you have here on the left-hand side, the French farming production levels for domestic consumption, i.e. For feeding the French population, knowing that this has been the scope of our work. And on the right-hand side, you have the imports. So the large circle is trend-based imports. That is a scenario whereby international trade keeps growing, as has been the case for decades, including for foodstuff, where you have imports on the order of 50 million tons, and inside you have the territorial cooperation scenario, which shows a strong reduction of imports by a factor of 4 by 2050. Now, very quickly, how can we divide imports by a factor of 4 using this scenario? This is what I said earlier, being sober with food consumption, with farming productions coming directly from consumption patterns and from the fact that we reduce meat-based consumption, i.e. the imports of feed cakes and oil seeds and or tropical fruit and veggies, i.e. reducing our import needs and requirements. And the second factor being re-insuring, relocating, basically with a clear choice to turn national farming production to the domestic market, cutting imports and using land in France to produce farming products and to reduce imports. Now, this relocation is a clear, can be a clear subject of decision, deciding to give the priority to the domestic production of fruit and vegetables, maintaining the farming production level in France, which is about 150 million tons, while reducing the imports significantly. The consequences on transportation are as follows. knowing that I need to finish on time. On transportation, we've mapped out this specifically in the study I'm presenting to you today. The large circles are the trend-based scenarios, and the inner discs are the first two scenarios, and when you divide imports by a factor of 4, you divide by a factor of 8 the induced international traffic and transportation, including a number of products like feed, cakes and oilseeds, which get no longer imported because we need less animal feed in lower volumes. So this has a significant impact, and energy consumption and CO2 emissions from the transportation industry will be significantly down if we use these scenarios. Last slide is about the carbon footprint of the food system by 2050, according to the various scenarios. You can see we were at 163 million tons. This is what I told you as a number. Including the trend-based scenarios, we have a significant reduction due to efforts and initiatives which will be taken, and you have very significant drop using the most sober scenarios. My last sentence will be to say that these carbon emissions and greenhouse gas emissions from the farming industry in color green will gain much traction in the food system, but they are the ones who will be most significant, accounting for half of the carbon emissions. In the transition 2050 scenarios, all industries in the aggregate, i.e. methanes and nitrous oxides, which keep being used in these scenarios, account for half of the greenhouse gas emissions for France and the French population by 2050 in these various scenarios. So just to say that there's a huge challenge to successfully pull off the transition in farming operations in terms of the goals to be achieved, and Jörg told us that agriculture could become carbon positive. So how do we get there? Thank you very much, Carine, for this presentation, for setting the scene. Now, how do we get there? And how do we get there in a manner which is fair and equitable for everyone, including for farmers? And this will be the subject of our discussion. We have Sébastien BOUVATIER, Deputy to the Director for Environmental Performance and Regional Management at the French Ministry of Food and Agriculture. You'll tell us how we get to carbon neutrality. Céline, you're a farmer in the Tarn region, south of France, and you chair the Intercéréales Communication and Promotion Committee. And we have Florence PRADIER. Thank you for being here as well. You're Director General of a corporation called Coopération Agricole. And you tell us what your role and duty is in this transition process. To start with you, Sébastien BOUVATIER, tell us all about the stakes and challenges and how they cascade into the French level plan. What role and place has sobriety and these very deep changes in your plans?
Bonjour à tous.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for inviting me and giving me the floor. I've got a few slides. I don't know whether, well, if you press the green button, it should work. Perfect. So on this first slide, I share with you different elements regarding the agricultural and strand regarding the national low-carbon strategy, with 10% of emissions, 19% of the French emissions are due to agriculture. This is mainly what is happening on the French territory, what I'm going to present to you, with approximately 20% of the emissions which rely or due to agriculture, and with a specific role which has been addressed before, which is agriculture, which is emitting greenhouse gas effect, but also which also plays a key role, especially when we talk about agriculture. We talk about agriculture and forest, and we have this global approach when it comes to climate. And I saw this because they also store carbon, which therefore enables to have a balance, because of course there will always be residual levels in the long term. So another sector which is also exposed to the impact of the climate change as extreme events, the climate changes are difficulties agriculturists have to deal with and are confronted with. So there were interactions between agriculture, climate, which is very important. On the other side of this slide, you will see that green or clean emissions of the agriculture are non-CO2 emissions, such as, for example, there is a methane in the livestock sector, in the breeding sector, and also the nitrous oxide. Which is more related to fertilizers. So when we look at the balance with the green and red dots on the right-hand side, it's about the role of carbon capturing effect, role played by the forest and grasslands, for example, as well, and also the emissions effect on cultivated soils. But there's also the protection side, because it has not been mentioned a lot, but any artificial land is also preserving natural agricultural lands and forest lands in order to reach the objectives. Once this debate is describe or settled, how this national low-carbon strategy is addressing this topic. So the trajectory we are talking about, this is now the second low-carbon national strategy that we are talking about and referring to. And what is planned is to divide by a factor of 2, so divide by 2 about 45% reduction of emissions induced by agriculture by 2050. And also a threshold level around or transition around 2030. So this is for the low carbon national strategy number 2, and we are currently working on the strategy number 3, which will be completed during the year 2024, which is about replanning, setting new objectives for the state, and which will be done through the domestic regulation and law. And we try to align with the increase of the ambition decided collectively at the European level. As it has been mentioned too, we see that emissions when it comes to agriculture are not supposed to be at 0 by 2050. And because the agricultural activities, that is to say the natural and biological processes which are at stake for the agricultural production, are emitting greenhouse gas such as methane and nitrous oxide. So of course there will be a part of the production which will lead to emissions, but as long as we maintain a level of production that meets the needs of the food needs of the population, and to compensate the carbon emitted, well, this is a major topic, because there is a climate package which is currently being discussed at the European level in order to define what is the ambition for the lands, and the idea is to reach progressively levels where the agriculture-induced emissions will be compensated by and balanced by the sinks, and the forest sector will be a negative sector when it comes to net emissions when we add both sectors. So there are ongoing discussions about what is the date for which we can set these ambitions to at the European level, and how this effort can be shared between the member states in Europe. So these are ongoing negotiations. And what kind of support, and how do we get there, I guess. Yes, and on the next slide, actually, this is about how we can cascade down these general objectives into how can we turn them into concrete and tangible action. So this is done through the identification of major and important levers. For example, the reduction of the major gas emissions, such as nitrous oxide and methane. So they are tools that we can use to do so, on the fertilization tools, on the leguminous plants, on the animal feed rations, on the breeding approach. And so there are different levers. We can also use as a lever the energy efficiency and the choice of energy which is chosen in order to make the production, agricultural production work. So we can also think in terms of renewable energy. We mentioned the carbon capture in soils, but also in biomass. We can also work and on, and it has been mentioned by Carine BARBIER before, on the waste, food waste, and also in a more cross-cutting approach. There are also method-based approaches on how do we perform sensors in order to make sure that they are more accurate on a regular basis, and to integrate also the lost scientific discoveries and insights in this work. So we need to address these levers through political decisions, public political decisions and political decision. And this is what is at stake through the climate action plan defined and detailed by the ministry. There is a document which is quite recent. It was published and issued a year ago or so, and which is summarizing through the public policies led by the ministries. We make use of those levers through the inputs on the circular economy, so different inputs that help us work on these different levers to make the agriculture change in order to meet the best we can the climate challenge. Well, there were contradictory insights over the past years, or the contradictory measures. So the idea is to have a compass and to have a direction. Yes, as part of the work we perform for the low carbon national strategy, we want to make sure that for each lever we have an action, because each action will bring about 1% of reduction or 0.5% of reduction, and all adding them all, we are going to be able to reach the objective. So each tenth of a degree is important, as we understood this morning. So we need to go for it and seek those degrees. So I'm sure we'll have a very intense and interesting discussions later on. So Céline, IMART, you live on a daily basis with this impact on climate change as an agriculturer. So how do you approach this type of topic as an agriculturer, as a farmer, and especially as with the other positions that you hold? Do you mention, do we have levers? We have a lot of ideas in the cereal, in the crop industry. As a farmer, I've got a farmer and I do seeds multiplication between the Tarn and Haute-Garonne in the south of France. So I do colza, alfalfa, and protein crops, alfalfa, and also sunflowers. And so this is, I'm a spokesperson of this industry. This is a sector which is a short loop, which is bring together all the players of the cereals sector, crops, and also other sectors which are more representing a minority in this production. So it's about collecting dealers, collecting stakeholders, collecting. So you have windmills, corporation, and so this is a intercrop association. It's all these industries which represents. We are 120,000 cereal growers in France. So this is has a positive impact in terms of relocation, short loops, short circuits, and also in keeping and preserving some of the landscapes where in regions where you don't have much more activities or different activities. So we are 240,000 farms, and a lot of businesses are linked to this value chain, and therefore this is we talk about a lot of jobs which are generated at the local level, at the territorial level. So this transition is something that we are facing at the moment, and I'm going to talk about how we are going to face it in the future and how we can mitigate our impact. So, and this is how to adapt to extreme events, yes, and also what we need in order to make progress in the future, because we are producing food, and this is we are proud of providing food to to people, but we're also proud to produce energy and to be involved in this energy transition and to reach that carbon neutrality, because as you mentioned very rightfully, this is we need a compass, but we also contribute to the environmental and ecological challenge and stake. So climate change is something that we can observe, and we are suffering from this. We are very often the first one to observe this because we are working directly with the nature. We see also in the crop, we see winters with a lot of rain. We have also a lot of, which has an impact on durum wheat, for example, on hard wheat, for example. So we need to, we are faced with this need to adapt to climate change, agri-forestry, development of green coverage, integrating leguminous plants also into the environment. So these are different industries, practices that are being implemented and for which we need support, as we will probably explain a bit more later on. You need what support, research. Well, yes, we need to be encouraged and we need to have the support in order for us to commit to this transition, because it's good to do alfalfa, for example, other crops, but we need to have actors and people buying on the market. So because we are in a society and in a financial context that means that we need to be supported and to have a demand. So in order to be able to create this added value. So we are part of this transition. I wanted to stress that research is a key element. We meant about fundamental research, but we also technical institutes who are doing applied research as well. And we are very much involved together with them. They are performing and carrying out works on applied research. And Phenomobile is mobile greenhouses reproducing a microclimate, and inside, and this is in order to anticipate climate change, how crops could behave in the future. We have also a robot, a system which is called a Phenomobile, which making use of cameras and drones. It's highly technological in order to observe the fields and to act very responsively and to anticipate climate change. Is about adapting to new pests appearing, and we've seen a lot of new pests in the past years. So we have a flow of imports and exports, and therefore we see insects, pests that we did not see in our fields 10 years ago. So we have to find solutions for this as well. As we mentioned, the levers, we have public policies telling us that you need to relocate production for the need of the French people, but on the other side, we tend heavily to multiply the signing of exchanges agreement with other countries and having an impact on our stocks. So this is also contradictory policies, public policies, and I think we'll come back to this later on. So this is as an introduction about what we do to adapt. And now I would like to talk about how can we mitigate. So we are aware that as agriculturals we emit gases, but also agriculture is a chance, and this has been acknowledged by the COP23 as a solution to mitigate the climate change. And the initiative for 1000 is important. There is an important role to play because cereal growth is capturing CO2. And as it has been said, as of 2035 and 36, the role of carbon sink of the forests are going to be reduced, to go down, and then the agriculture could represent 86% of additional carbon sink in the natural sink through photosynthesis as well. We have soils which can also store this carbon. And with crops, we can produce grain for food and to capture and store carbon, and also to produce renewable energy, to produce organic materials, biomaterials. and this is cereals is an asset for carbon to reduce the dependence on fossil carbon. So I think that maybe people may think differently. If I think about the different crops I'm growing, such as corn, for example, the more we can optimize the soils and be virtuous on the way we use the soils, and the more we can be intensive on the way we use, the more the photosynthesis will be working by capturing carbon, and also through the waste we will be able to produce vegetable plant protein currently we are importing vegetable and plant cake at the moment, and we will be able to be a source of renewable energy. And this is what we can do as an industry, what we can bring about as an energy. We can demonstrate that we can bring about solutions to the food stake, to the food challenge, to the environmental challenge, and energy challenge as well. So this is what we are proud of at the moment. So we can produce more, according to us, and produce better. This is not contradictory as long as we are clear on what are the improvement factors and what do we need in terms of levers to reach that objective. So this is, yes, a clear vision, says Carine. You have the objectives, but now how do you get there? How do we get there? Well, we are already committed and engaged. How can you make sure that you are in line with the objectives to fight climate change? Well, we're already on board this journey, and we have been looking at how we can improve practices. Today we're going to talk about how we can use agroforestry and leguminous plants and use them as levers. We know that one important source of our emissions has to do with the fertilizers and the mineral fertilizers. This is why it's important to develop sources, because a plant needs nitrogen and minerals, but it's important to improve the sourcing, the purchasing of. So we have compost, breeding, manure, fertilizers, which can be a source of diversification, and there is a technological leap that needs to be made for companies such as Yara. Mineral fertilizers manufacturers are currently testing heavily new processes using hydrolysis and produce mineral fertilizers through hydrolysis, which will help reduce or even remove completely the fossil fuel energy and gas in the manufacturing of mineral fertilizers. These are solutions that show that we need technology, innovation, and research, whether when it comes to selecting our species. It's true for fertilizers, as I said, but we need this research level that will help us identify solutions. It's a collective commitment that is needed, and we need to make that link between our sectors. So we have also the logistics sector, which is important, and you presented it very well when you said that logistic transport is a huge part of what agriculture is going to emit in terms of gas. And in the cereal, in the crop industry, we have a multimodal transportation system. We are the first users of a piggyback system in order to use less the road transports, and in order to do so, we need also financial investments, because it is a huge step for us, and it's a heavy burden. So, and for example, on our industry, we have 7,600 silos, which helps us to store the crops, we have issues about how we can manage the insects, the pests, having a system through the use of a cold technology that could help us storing them. So we need to resort to the railway transportation, the river transportation. We know that restoring these 6,700 silos is 3 billion. So it's good to do recovery plans and to put in place recovery plans, because we think that transition and change towards carbon neutral agriculture is something which is good, but it's not sufficient. It's not just about renewing our equipment to reduce the carbon footprint by a little level. So it's part of the work to be done, having a more virtuous equipment and gears. But this is just one part of the chain. We need to talk about technology, disruptive technology, and innovating and investing in this sector. So all our sectors, so the mills, the flour mill, for example, is a sector with the use of biogas, the reducing the use of water, and by 2030, all the maltsters we are working on the carbon footprint as well through the carbon footprint and reducing through bioethanol, hydrogen, and the rapeseed. So we have different tools, and we try to reach that objectives this way. And as I said, there are different things that are needed in order to reach that objective. We have to have a supported commitment, a commitment supported through a clear political culture and an approach. We can give means to the agriculture, but we need to have a clear vision, not to have contradictory actions. So we're talking about relocating production and the fact that we are submitted to open exchanges on the market internationally. So I think that you need to be transparent and to be true. I don't want to have a moral discourse here, but we need this transition in order for this to be viable for us, and we need to be paid for this. And this is something which is key in the low carbon label that we developed as the crop sector. We have a label which has been organized, validated, and acknowledged by the Ministry of the Ecology, Environmental Transition. So we are connected to the low carbon market in order to make sure that agriculture is committing to virtuous practices who will have an improvement of their results and improving their capturing of carbon that can improve. This is an initiative of an industry which is setting itself objectives. Agriculture needs these financial means, but we need also to be acknowledged and to be proud of what we are doing. So this is this political vision, and the fact that we have received an incentive, of course, to improve those policies, but also the idea around the price. It's to have a complemental additional price on the with an incentive on the label, low carbon label. So we need industries which will create values, and at the end of the day, this is the whole chain. Value chain down to the end user, to the consumer, even if it's within a difficult context with the inflation, that people have to understand that in order to have relocated food production, much more committed in transition and into virtuous systems, there will be a need in the future to pay the price for it, to pay the right price for it. So this is, well, also there are the supermarket sector as well, the mass distribution sector that needs to be to play smart. Yes, we are fully involved in this transition. We need to have a clear political vision, innovation and research policies, and also investments in order to help us make that step further. Well, thank you for this testimony. You're very much engaged and committed. So, and I wait for your questions. You will ask your questions in direct, live, and also for those who are connected online. I've seen a few appearing already. Florence PRADIER, thank you as well for being with us. And before talking about experiments that go in the right direction as well, can you tell us more about the agricultural cooperation? What is it all about? Well, thank you. Thank you, first of all, for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here with you today because this is a topic which is important for us at the agricultural cooperation. Coopération Agricole, who are we? Well, this is the house of the agricultural cooperative. And these are the businesses of agriculturists. And in France, we are specific because we have a lot of agricultural cooperatives. And these are companies producing, collecting, and also distributing. It's a business to which the farmer is giving the processing and selling of its production. So we have 2,300 of those cooperatives in France, whether it be in this crop sector. It's 70% of the crop sector is doing so, is operating through cooperatives. We are also members of Intercéréales, but in other 93% of the pork sector, pork breeding sector, is also done within cooperatives. so you may have cooperatives of supply, so agriculture is getting together in order to buy together some of the products that they need, and therefore to improve also the competitiveness or the profitability of their businesses. But cooperatives is about getting together in order to do better. So once you have this objective and this stake, and these are cooperatives which were created in some of the regions, they are called the daughters of poverty, because they were created because people were facing a difficult solution, so they got together in order to find solutions and to manage to make their living out of their work. So as I said, there are 2,300 nowadays, 40% of the food sector with known brands, Florence, which are manufactured by cooperatives, and agricultures went down to the processing of the products as well, and 40% of the products that you find in the supermarkets which are manufactured by cooperatives. So this is a strong local footprint. So 2 out of 4 agricultures work within cooperatives or related or working in partnership with cooperatives. This is a democracy-based business. It's not a top-down power which is applied, it's coming from the ground. So it's also important because when it comes to transitions, and we are referring to these transitions, well, these are tools which are enabling a lot of people to work together and to act and change a lot of things. They are created by the ground and they act on the ground. So if there are transitions to be made and transformations to be made, this will be done at their level. There are a lot of advisors belonging to these cooperatives and that are going to support and roll out the actions, supporting the farmers in order for the farmers to get to know new practices and helping them having access to the digital world. And there are a lot of things which are being rolled out as part of this carbon plan, which are done at the level of cooperatives. It's also done by the agricultural Chamber of Agriculture. Well, as Sébastien BOUVATIER said, this is an important lever. This could be an important lever. Yes, I don't know if it's a lever as such, but we will have a role to play, and cooperatives will have a role to play on that topic due to the extent of what they represent in the agricultural sector, but also in the agri-food sector. But I would like to be quite clear on this, and it's important to talk about very specific and accurate figures. When we talk about agricultural and carbon emissions, 19% of the emissions induced by the agricultural sector. There are also 19% which are coming from the building sector, 30% coming from the transportation sector, 10% from the energy, and 3% due to the waste. So just to identify what's coming from the agriculture, and 10% coming from the industry. So, and I think this is what you mentioned in your presentation. So when we count per sector where the emissions come from. So when we look at the food sector, it's covering part of the transport sector, the whole agricultural or most of the agricultural part, and also partly the industrial part. So we need to work on those topics and all those stakes. So when we ask ourselves, what are we talking about? And when it comes to the different levers identified, it's important for us to be aware that there is this idea of carbon emissions, this whole system, the food system leading to emissions, and even beyond, because in cooperatives you also have the biosourced material manufacturing. So this is a different environment. It can be linked to the building sector, to the car industry as well. And also we can talk about the energy sector, because you have a lot of methanization, so energy production being developed in France, and which is with the aim of getting rid or moving away from fossil fuel to make more use of renewable energy. So when we talk about this, it's about capturing and about converting, about emissions to be reduced for the whole food sector. We are around 100 millions of tons of CO2 equivalent, so approximately 25%. I agree fully with the figures presented earlier on. So we are around 100 million tons, and we'll have to reduce by 20% by 2030, and by 40% by 2050. So we are talking about capturing. You mentioned the carbon sinks, but on carbon sinks, the carbon capturing is of 30 millions of tons, and it needs to increase in order to reach 80 millions of tons. So this is approximately multiplied by a factor of 3. So therefore, we need to increase carbon capturing, and also we need to reduce emissions. So we need to act on those two levers. And there's a third lever we never mention, which I think is important to bear in mind, because agriculture, or at least produce derived from agriculture, can replace insulating plastics that you find inside a Mercedes, for example. This exists. You have cooperatives in the flax industry. This is not taken into account when we talk about carbon footprint. So it was not included in the carbon equation that were looked at so far. So we need to make calculations. It's important to say that agriculture is emitting a lot, but agriculture is also able to transform emissions done by other sectors and to replace those emissions by emissions which would emit lower carbon levels of carbon. So even if it's emitting less, it means that usually we're not able to calculate it. So it's something that we need to do still, and it's important to remind us of this.
Now, time is running, so I suggest we focus on very tangible initiatives. You are carrying out experiments and tests which aim at reducing the carbon footprint. And you gave the example of alfalfa. Can you tell us about it? Now, very quickly, I told you who we were, what we are talking about. Now, let me tell us about the future. Can things change? Yes, they can. Let me mention two examples here. That of alfalfa, which is a very small sector, but which is very much coal-dependent. Alfalfa is basically farming operations which have to dehydrate the alfalfa plant, which is used as a protein for animals to avoid importing soya cake and oil seeds. But for it to be consumable every year, we have to dehydrate them. Otherwise, they rot and can't be used. So in order to dehydrate alfalfa, you need to dry it. And the most frequent source of energy was coal. And alfalfa producers also dehydrate beet waste. Once you have taken out the sugar portion of the beet, you have the part of the beetroot, which you use for animal feed. Now, dehydration plants decided, and this was back in the years 2000, to tackle the issue of their own greenhouse gas emissions, including converting or shifting their energy mix. And between 2005 and 2022, when they started deciding to reduce their GHG emissions from these plants they were operating, they reduced GHG emissions by 70%. I'm telling you about the first part, to reduce emissions at the industrial level. At the industry level, this is a sector which, by just changing the heating nozzles, which enable them to use timber, to use wood. So basically, they've been using renewable energy. They use wood waste, forest waste, and reduce their GHG emissions by 70%. And they're trending to zero, and they'll get there. But it took them 20 years to do so. And it involved lots of efforts and energies to get funded, to get investment. And it's of importance that I explain something here. When you have the price of coal, which is at 10, and the price of forest wood, which is at 50, and you operate in an international market where you can buy alfalfa anywhere, and when it is using coal for producers, for feed, for animal raisers, you will buy it at 20 and not 30 if you use timber. So it's not the right numbers, but of course the animal raisers will be using the coal-based the coal-based feed, because they have their own accounting and their own costs to cover. So alfalfa alfalfa, the alfalfa producers, with the help of the French ADEME agency, to come up with mechanics to offset the price differential from the energy source. So you need to come up with the right solutions to demultiply the equations to more industries and to more operations. So Sébastien, you also have tangible initiative examples. I heard speak about agroecology this morning on a radio channel I was listening to. I thought it was good news. Can you tell us more about it, agroecology, and tell us about very tangible initiatives which you've been doing and supporting? Yes, indeed. Agroecology, quote unquote, is about coming up with farming processes and practices which use the natural phenomena to the maximum, reducing their dependencies to external inputs. In just a few words, this is what agroecology is about. Basically, by reducing the external inputs, which most of the time are emissions generating, and by doing that, they reduce the climate impact from their farming practices. So obviously, this is farming practice that we try and promote in farming. You mentioned the legumes, the change in crop rotations. You also spoke about the alternative fertilizers. All these are a variety of farming practice to change the way farmers operate their farms. You also mentioned technological solutions connected with precision farming, but it's not one against the other, it's one with the other, and you need both types of solutions to reach the goals we have set for ourselves collectively. And this is what the IPCC has been saying by identifying the two factors, with some more work to be done on agroecology, but we need to work on the two prongs, on the two thrusts now. The low-carbon certification was mentioned. The low-carbon label certification was mentioned. And the need for support and assistance, and the need for farmers to remain decision makers and in control of their technical choices. So let's focus a few minutes on the certification mark, on the low-carbon certification mark, which makes it possible to demonstrate their commitment and to have their commitment for sustainability recognized, making it possible to identify the various factors and drivers connected with agroecology and the connected technological choice, and to come up with an action plan over multiple years to improve performance and to improve the equation and recognizing and valuing the low carbon approach. So this certification mark, the low carbon certification mark, was set up by the French state and was part of the stimulus plan connected with carbon footprint assessments applied to the farming industry with volunteer farmers accepting to have analysis done on their farms with councillors from the chambers of agriculture and co-ops as well, cooperative representatives and coordinators helping the farmers advance things. Now, we got a question who says, from Thomas, we've been talking about carbon a lot, thinking the global level is fine, but how can we protect biodiversity when going towards carbon neutrality? How not to forget the protection of biodiversity? Now, we are fortunate with respect to biodiversity and climate issues. If you refer back to the IPCC report on land, specifically on land, which dates back to a few years, basically we have a situation of synergy between practices focusing on climate issues and other practices focusing on biodiversity issues. So, and you have a mix of both. So you can basically kill two birds with one stone. So in our policy making, and again, this is very similar to the low carbon certification mark. You have the cost, the cost benefit analysis to be done. So above and beyond the climate front, you need also to have guarantees on the biodiversity front. Well, I was about to say the thing. When we diversify crop rotation, when you do agroforestry, when you do intermediary coverage, when we have solutions with plant auxiliaries. Remember that corn today is the first crop which used so-called integrated fight trichogram to fight P-RAL and sesame are solutions used by all corn makers because the cost is lower than pesticides and it's easier for human people to deploy it in on their fields. So all these practices to achieve carbon neutrality, to have grass strips and silos with insects. If you apply all these practices in a correlated manner, will benefit biodiversity across the farming sector. But it's a very valid point. So the thinking shouldn't be done in silos. Carbon neutrality is a policy and is an approach, but we shouldn't fragment the approach. And it is important to focus on all the aspects and take a holistic approach to the societal and environmental dimensions. Do feel free, Carine, if you want to add something. Yes, indeed. I concur with what Mr. BOUVATIER said. There is real synergy between biodiversity issues and climate issues. And I would like to say that with respect to farming resilience, it is a fundamental point. Unfortunately, we import a lot of inputs, including farming inputs, be they nitrogen, phosphate-based fertilizers, plant protection products, farming products. There are lots of inputs which are imported and which are threatened by geopolitical crisis or pandemic crisis like the COVID pandemic. And to the best of my knowledge, consumption of plant protection products and pesticides basically keep being used at a very high level in France and even on the rise for some of these products. So somehow today there is a statement, but we don't want it to remain lip service, and we need to help the farming sector to come up with solutions to help reducing the inputs in the way of pesticides and plant protection products. And there's the organic aspect of the carbon sinks, permanent grazing land and crops. But we haven't made it possible. We haven't been able to increase organic matter in the land, making sure that grains and cereal crops become carbon sinks. We mentioned the practices, but then the real question is how we switch from theory to action and how we make it possible by way of the common agricultural policy or by international agreements, engaging all these policies to engage in a switch, engage in migration, and we are not there yet. We're not saying that we scale up and we move to gear one. No, change is already in motion in all the industries, in all the sectors. Organic matter, virtues, principles have been initiatives taken for a number of years. Now, the real question is how to scale up and how we make sure they have a real impact on the numbers. Plant protection products have been declining in the last few years. These are numbers from the French Ministry for Ecology. And in the consumption of plant protection products, organic products and biocontrol products account for 30% of the products used. And these numbers are on the rise, which means that organic plant protection products, when they exist, And when they are given to farmers, when they are shown to farmers, when farmers get supported, then farmers use them and they work. And on vegetable, you use copper, you use sulfur to avoid synthetic chemicals. But when there are solutions, be it with variety of seeds, be it with the inputs everywhere, when they are biocontrolled and organic products, when research make these products available that can be used in reasonable conditions, human-wise and financially-wise, then it's being done. So we're not sitting idle. We are moving forward. Now, with respect to Europe, there is the farm to fork strategy, European strategy, and you have biodiversity strategies, which have very clear goals to reduce plant protection products by 50%, to reduce farming inputs and fertilizers by n percentage points. So very specific targets issued by the European level. The first estimates have us believe that Europe will reduce its food production and increase its food dependency to other countries. Well, I disagree. Today, we all need to be fully aligned with the same goals and the same level of understanding. When you have a summit, a mountain to climb, and you have flip-flops on your feet, which is basically the situation for the farming industry, then you are required to have teams around you to move forward and climb the mountain. And as part of the teams helping you, you have the government agencies, the administration, and you have policy making. And in France, with respect to plant protection products, France is the world champion in this area. We are world champions of food safety. We are world champions of plant protection products, which are forbidden in France and which are authorized in our European neighbors with freely moving products. Now, this leads to a situation when we don't produce these products here in France, but we keep consuming them. And we have on our shelves products that are not produced here in France. So you have injunctions and you have requirements, regulatory requirements, which are non-viable, non-durable, non-sustainable. This conflict has to be managed. We need to have general consistency and general alignment and sustainability of these injunctions and regulations. You know, these regulations or these injunctions can't be disconnected from shared rules and practices. So there are a number of things which have to be, a number of mechanisms, making sure everybody is aligned on the same goals and objectives with no side effects and no vicious effects. Vicious effects could be, with a clear example, we are in the City Hall of Paris. The Paris City Hall, you have a policy to say that in the school cafeterias we want to have more sustainable and more organic products. Fine, we have lots of organic products coming from Brazil and very far away, because the price of a meal for a school child is about €1, €1.50. We're incapable of getting products from France at this level. We have to get imported products, or you have farms with 1,000 cows or 500,000 animals, intensive farmings, and city councillors don't look into that. City councillors and politicians ask and require farmer things, but they don't look into their backyard. So in the city council, there's not €1 more allocated to budgets in order to make sure that there's consistency and alignment between the local level and the global level. So you can't have cost of materials at €0.70 is unfeasible, non-feasible. So we need to have more consistency in the food system and in the policies. Now, we spoke a lot about imports, about trade agreements, about trade relations with our partners. Now, the question is that of having reciprocal standards. In the free trading agreements, you have sections on environmental requirements, covering and providing guarantees in the way trade agreements are conducted with respect to safety of products, with respect to environmental protection, and a number of other aspects. But beyond this, we need to have mechanisms and policies in place and to be developed, which has been the case already. Today, we are currently negotiating a draft regulation on fighting imports from deforestation. We have a draft bill of law on the European carbon tax. So all these mechanisms are emerging. The idea is that we have reciprocal norms and standards and instruments with equal opportunities between and across farmers of all countries, that the lowest bidders don't get the premiums and don't get the upper hands. So basically, things are consolidating and are emerging to meet these needs. We are talking about the carbon tax being applied on the European borders and a number of policies and regulations which take time, as there are 27 member states. Now, when the carbon tax has been so between the time the carbon tax is being designed as a principle and the time it is applied, there might be 5, 10, 15 years going by. No, things are going a bit faster. The fact of renegotiating things at the international level takes time, and we have to be very careful with timing. You don't want to sideline farmers who commit to engaging in best practices to optimize and improve things. We need to keep them on board, and we need to accelerate and make the terms and conditions conducive without sidelining people, without having them drop behind, keeping everybody on board the vessel. And we understand that with respect to food sovereignty, this was of importance as well. Carine, then we'll take questions from the floor. How many hands, how many questions? Okay, many questions from the audience. On the price of food, cost of food, which you mentioned, rightly so, Madame Pradier. When we look at the household consumption patterns, 50% of household spending is devoted to housing and to food. So two very fundamental cost items. But housing takes the upper hand, and food is taking a low share. So we need to have more of a systemic approach. And with the ADEM scenarios and the national low carbon strategies, you can get this holistic view. And food is in fact the adjustment variable of household spending. Once you've paid your rent, once you've paid the hard cost, then you look at cost, you look at food and telephone subscriptions, for example, which are extremely costly. So there's real hard thinking which needs to be devoted on the price of land in urban areas and in in rural areas, how to make sure that public policies make it possible to reduce some spending costs so that value is given, so that food is given back its true value, so that we have a sustainable food system making it possible for farmers to resist climate change. As you said, price of food is increasing, and the first products which take the hit are organic products. The increase in the price of food impacts organic products first. Certification mark products, organic products have been declining in sales. So there's a real issue connected with the value of food, with subsidies provided so that it be accessible to the greater number. But the other cost items have now been taking the place of food. And you have all the low-cost retailers, but that's another story. Okay, keep your questions as short as possible so that we can take as many as possible. Okay, let's have your questions. Please give us your first names. Hi. Hi, my name is Romain. What is your take on the needs for human resources, i.e. the number of farmers we'll need in order to conduct this energy transition, talking about agroecological practices with less mechanization, more human workforce, resources and jobs and employment. Yes, good, relevant question. It is critical. The generational renewal is not happening at the pace which is necessary in the next 20 years. 50% of farmers will have retired. So it is a real issue today. And it is connected with lots of factors. It is connected with low income in farms, on farm, and lack of recognition. Very often farmers may have the impression to commit to the well-being of society, to do good, and feel stigmatized and feel a lack of recognition, being blamed, being pointed at. There is a crisis of vocations, and there are issues with access to land, access to buildings, access to the tooling and machinery and human resources. If you want to lower the inputs and lower the use of some inputs, we have issues with recruiting seasonal workers. Price of labor is very costly. Cherry picking, vineyards, onions, garlic, harvesting is very much labor intensive, and farmers basically are having buses of Moroccans or Eastern European people to do the harvesting. You have winemakers flying in charter flights of workers from North Africa. The issue of the workforce and generational renewal is critical. And solutions very much like carbon, you have multiple solutions, not just one. You need to improve the value and recognition of the farming industry. You need to have supportive public policies, and I believe I heard the new government-elect said it will do things. Public policies, support and assistance, consideration and recognition for role of farmers who feed people, who protect the biodiversity environment. This is how you will recreate the desire. You need to have an industry which creates and recreate values with consumers who are ready to pay a premium for high-quality food. Otherwise, the workforce will not be paid at the right level. The same with agri-food. In the agri-food industry, the processing industry, those making yogurts, for example, and dairy products, we have the same issues with a shortage of skills and workshop. And this is the jobs and employments connected with the living matter. You need to adjust to the crops, you need to adjust to nature. These jobs, in fact, are not very well recognized, and there's a shortage of value, a lack of value, lack of recognition. And these are exciting jobs. People engaging in these jobs need passion, have passion, because you need to give a lot of yourself. When you feed the world, when you feed your neighbors, you give a lot of yourself. You need to feed the world, because France is an exporting country with respect to farming, and it's important that France does and is so. We need to have people, we need to have youth taking these jobs, and today it's a real problem. Working in farming plants, processing plants, you can turn human jobs into robots, which is happening. It's dynamics in motion, because some of these tasks can be strenuous and hard. So if you're interested, do send us your resumes. Okay, we only have time for one more question, and then we'll have to break for lunch. Okay. My name is Philippe Segers. I'm an agro-climatologist. I'm a farmer, the son and grandson of a farmer. In what you said, there's something which surprised me. You spoke about technicians. You didn't speak about public research. You didn't speak about the INRA, Agronomical Research Organization, and others like CRED and lots of other research institutes in France. As a former farmer, I can tell you that when I was a farmer, my impression was that we had cooperatives out there, that we had farmers' unions which pushed us into real crimes, into over-indebtedness, pushed us into using an abusive inputs and pesticides and chemicals and tooling and machinery big time. And you can see this, in the region of Tarn in southern France, there is this movie, Big Farm and Farm Big, quote unquote. But in the village where this movie was shot, there is a duck operation farm with 80,000 ducks, which has been created, intensive farming with a tendency to do more and go for more, with farmers having the impression that they get Uberized to the profit of cooperatives. So cooperatives do not always serve the interest of farmers. So this is a perception, which means that some of us may not have the desire to keep pushing, to keep going, because when you have an 80,000 duck farm, it means that many small holding farms have to close their operations. I'm not here to engage in politics here. You have your own interpretation, you have your own analysis of the farming model and how you deplore what was the case in the farming industry in the 1980s. This is your own analysis and interpretation. But I really sincerely believe that in the farming industry, we shouldn't call models into question. You can have an 80,000 duck farm, possibly with animal well-being, with biodiversity. Maybe we should look into what is livable for farmers to take weekends. I don't know this farm, the case of this farm, but you could have farms and farming which can do on small holding farms for local markets and other types, bigger types of agriculture. I do not believe that the farming model should be opposed. In this question, which brings us together, this is how to get carbon neutral, to reject some models or to suggest some farming practices based on the number of farmers, the number of animals, the size of farms is not an answer. The answer comes from the combination of different types of farming, different types of models, and in all parts of farming you can have smallholder farmings and larger operations. So this is not the way to go. We need to all move together, and all the links in the chain, whatever its size, whatever its technical practice and choices, can contribute and be and can provide. Well, I spoke about the meat-based parts of farming production. I believe this is really.
So we see that we are in an unbearable situation. We consume 80 kilos of meat per inhabitant per capita and per day per year. In Africa, it's a lot less. So there's a true question: how do we address this question, this topic? And also, we need to take into consideration all the farmers who are involved in this production. Today in France, when we look at the land used, we realize that 80% of the surface is dedicated to breeding through grasslands or crop production, which are dedicated to animal feed, which amounts approximately to 50% of crop production, which is dedicated to animal feed. So we see that there's a need for human food, balanced food. We need also to produce something different. We mentioned also energy, biofuel, biosourced materials, which can be complementary to this agricultural production. And at some point, we need to speak truthfully. How do we make sure that the breeding sector is transformed to keep the jobs in this sector, obviously, but also to produce better, with better quality and with products which will be, at the end of the day, more expensive, that we will only consume once or twice a week, which will be twice or three times more expensive, to make sure that agriculture will have a proper livelihood. But it's maybe complementary, which will be essential and which will help diversify these agricultural businesses, these farms, and maybe through extensive breeding, which allow more carbon sinks thanks to these permanent grasslands. So there are different solutions which should help transforming this sector, to support this sector in order for the sector to be a proper stakeholder of this ecological transition, and the farming farming transition and making sure that everyone is on board, no one should be left aside, and the breeding sector obviously is a sector which is suffering a lot. But one needs to speak the truth and transparently, and we need to work very concretely. Florence, very briefly, you want to add something? Well, the commercial balance sheet in France is negative at the moment, and we need to be careful because we produce only 50% of the poultry, of the chicken, which are consumed in France. So we need to see what is the impact also on the French production. So and often we forget about this link that needs to be made between what we actually produce and what we actually consume. So this was the first part of my answer, and the second part regarding the topic raised regarding cooperatives and the agricultural world in general. So in the past, we asked the agricultural sector to produce enough so that everyone would have enough to eat, and to make sure this would be accessible to everyone, and it worked quite well, one must say. And now we ask the agricultural world to perform a major transition, because this is one of the key sectors which will be able to capture carbon, and I'm truly hopeful. I'm sure they will be successful. They are pragmatic people, and they are full of common sense, and they will be successful provided we provide them the economical equation that will allow them to progress in that direction. One should have an economic equation that would lead people to get products elsewhere with different requirements, with lower requirements than the one we asked from our farmers. To conclude, says Carine, a question you mentioned Africa, adieu to camera, who is watching us live, and I would like to greet all the people watching us remotely beyond our borders. And it's important to have to be part of this conference. The last report of the OMM says that 110 million of Africans will be confronted with poverty, targeting women, but also starving. So we've said a way to remind us that we need to show solidarity, internationally speaking. As a eco-feminist, I'm working on the field on a daily basis, and I know these forecasts are real. So the question is about how to help them also reduce their carbon footprint in those countries, if we can support them as well on the side of the food supply, if possible. Well, this is beyond my competency here, this question, but this is a conclusion word. Well, I think that this idea of international trade, international commerce is with the related price is important. We are importing poultry, chicken of lower quality coming from Brazil sometimes. So, and we keep the best part of the chicken for France, and then when we export the other parts to of the poultry to Africa, and at very cheap prices. So the question is about how we can regulate this international trade, making sure that on the one side we do need to limit the carbon footprint of the transport, and to provide something which is more consistent, to produce and consume at the closest at the doorstep, so to say, of the consumers. And there are also objectives on the Mediterranean basin, for example. There are needs that are not met, but we need to also make sure that the food crops in Africa can subsist, can survive, and should not be competed with through products coming from North America. I don't think that French chicken production is destroying the African industry, poultry industry. I don't think that this is the right example to take, if I may, on this topic. As agriculture and cereal and grain industry, we are also sensitive to this type of solidarity. This free trade is something which has been in place through this the globalization. We had to make do with it in a way. We really had to live through this transformation, but now there are real stakes, challenges through in our industry, because we realized that this solidarity challenges. When there was war in Ukraine, we had 30 to 40% of the wheat which which were frozen, and countries such as Tunisia, Lebanon, and the sub-Saharan Africa, when they have 4 months of crops stored, then after that they will be facing difficulties to feed their people and the bakers as well, to have enough flour to make their products. So we have also this idea of solidarity, which is present in our mind, and positive news, and we are proud of the fact that we know we are able to do so. We know we can produce food for us, for everyone, and also to meet those solidarity challenges, to do it in a positive way, in a good way, without losing sight of this challenge, which is carbon neutrality. Well, thank you for these conclusion words. I'm sorry if some people are frustrated in the room, because I saw hands raised and we don't have time to address those questions online as well. But buffet is awaiting us here, at least for those present with us, and we're going to meet up again at 2 p.m. in order to see how the energy system is reaching carbon neutrality, or is aiming for carbon neutrality. Enjoy your meal, and we resume at 2 p.m.